Good. So thanks everybody for coming. This is the XAML panel. How many of you went to the desktop panel earlier today? Cool, okay. On this particular one, we're going to be focusing on XAML specifically. So you'll see that we're not talking about MFC this time or some of the other cool things that did come up in the previous section. What we do want to do is give you an opportunity to ask the different people on the product teams here your questions about XAML, your questions about doing stuff for WinRT, doing stuff for phone, all the different devices that you might use XAML with. I want to encourage you, if you already have questions in mind, go ahead and you can start lining up. And you see this is a smaller audience than we had last time, so hopefully everybody here will get a chance to have their questions heard. But before you actually go there, I would like to have everybody introduce themselves. So why don't we start with the folks hiding down here at the end. I need to get you a mic, right? Here we go.
Hi, I'm Hamid Mahmoud. I'm a PM on the XAML team.
That's great.
My mic on? Oh, yeah, I'm Joe Stegman. I'm the group program manager on the XAML team, and that includes XAML for WinRT as well as WPF.
I'm Chapala Street. I'm another program manager on the XAML desktop team, so I work with Joe and Hamid.
Hello, I'm Dan Taylor. I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio Diagnostics team. We build the debugger, profiler, and IntelliTrace tools in Visual Studio. And I specifically work on performance analysis, but I'm happy to field questions about all diagnostics.
I'm Sean Oster. I'm another program manager on the XAML controls team.
Tim Hewer. That's another PM, obviously.
And Sam Jarwan. I'm another program manager on the XAML convergence team, working for Joe Stegman over there. And quick plug, I have a talk after this on what's new in Windows Phone Silverlight app, so if you want to learn that part of the XAML side, it's right at 5:30.
And I'm Pete Brown, and somehow I'm also a PM, even though I don't own any products or anything. So this is the all PM show here. So, Joe, did you want to start off with anything today, or?
Now that you mention it, I hadn't thought of anything, Pete. I gave a nice little spiel this morning.
So let's go right to questions then.
Yeah, sure.
So, first question.
Okay, I'm a developer. One of my projects is large form factor devices. I have Microsoft Perceptive Pixel and Pixel Sense devices. Do a lot of work in the Surface SDK. So Windows 8 doesn't have any of the multi-user capabilities that the Surface SDK had built into it, so it makes it kind of difficult to develop large form factor devices using Windows 8, multi-user support in particular, the ability to have events routed correctly for multiple users working at the same time in the same app. Is there any plans for kind of a, I don't know, Surface SDK 3.0 that's designed for Windows 8?
When you say multi-user, you mean multi-user input?
Multi-user simultaneous, so you have people working on the same device at the same time in different places.
Yeah, so we also have some initiatives with PPI as well on similar scenarios. I don't know what your scenario specifically is, but it is something that we're looking at because it's a challenge for us internally too. So when it will be coming to the platform, but it is something that we're looking at. Large meeting kind of environments. We have a couple people doing different things on different sides of a large 80-inch, 90-inch display type thing. So yeah, we're well aware of that and have that requirement ourselves too. So we're looking at that.
Cool, thank you. There was a question over here. The person, there we go.
So I'm using WPF since it came out. It's great, love it, thank you very much. Question about extension properties. Is that something that you guys anticipate being developed right now? We've got extension methods in C#, and sometimes I want to add a little bit more to these objects that perhaps I don't have direct access to the class itself. I want to create an extension class. Is that something that you guys see coming out, or is that more another team?
So that's a .NET question.
That'd be a language, yeah, .NET.
So that one is a .NET language question. I don't think we have the right folks on stage here right now to answer that for you. But it is something that we can talk to some of the other folks on the teams and see if we can get some answers on that. I would encourage you to probably start with the folks in the Visual Studio booth, because they would probably be the most convenient place for that right now.
Okay, one other question that kind of relates to that. Sometimes we get a pretty deep tree hierarchy of classes. WPF has a nice way of binding into that, which is great. sometimes we want to run some programmatic logic, like in an order-taking application. If one of the items down below changes, we want to update the total up at a higher level. Are you guys, is it possible to expose some of the internal functionality that you guys are using with the binding engines so we can hook into there instead of subscribing to all these observable collections and all these notify property change things? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
So simplifying the ability for a class deep in a hierarchy to notify some parent way up at the top that it's had a property change or something like that.
Yeah, without having to subscribe at every single
right at each
level
level.
and then unsubscribe. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Tim, yours?
I can't say that that's something that we've explored from a hierarchy standpoint.
Is there a pattern you'd recommend for that?
One of the things that we are exploring is being able to kind of subscribe to some other property's change notification, which is something that we've had people ask about. But I'm not sure that still would meet your needs because it sounds like you're in the kind of a list situation possibly as well. But maybe I can grab you afterwards and get a little bit more details. It doesn't sound like something we're looking at right now, and love to understand the scenario more if maybe other things that we're looking at may be able to solve that.
Okay. So it sounds like come up to Tim afterwards and see if we can get some more details to fold into planning. Great. Morning.
So you've done a lot of work in the new runtime to make XAML really performant, which is great. But there's also a lot of functionality missing there, and usually the argument is, well, we didn't put that in because it's not performant, which then in turn means I have to write a lot of code. There might be slow code that you then have to call. So what are you guys looking at going forward to also make the developer performant?
That's a great question.
I know.
From a developer productivity perspective, or just from not having to churn out so much boilerplate code?
Well, value converter, for instance, you have to write a lot of those now because there's a lot of binding things that it's not there. As one example, right? Or namespace mapping. So generally the thing that makes my SAML, or I can do a lot more just in SAML or with my designer that I now have to write code for.
So I definitely know that's a problem we all experience on this panel. We wear two hats, right? So we have our day job, then we go home and write code, write apps, and we have the same type of frustrations everyone else does. Like, why do I have to write so much code? Why isn't this code that has to be there everywhere just baked into the framework? So that's definitely something that we're aware of and trying to rectify as we look to the future planning. Does that help at all? Yes, we feel your pain.
If you deliver,
yes,
yeah, that helps.
Yes. Yes, we feel the pain, we know it's a problem, and it's something we're looking at.
Yeah, at a high level, I'll give a quick comment on that. When we think about implementing features, sometimes we think of it as just essentially the most important thing is to sort of enable the scenario. And sort of the way we like to do that is we like to make it as fast as possible, because if we don't make it fast at the framework level, then as a developer, you're kind of hosed. If it's not fast enough, that sucks. So we try to, we think about, can we enable it at the most basic level that is enabling such that you can build your experiences on top of it, and that it's fast. And if we do that, then if we do a set of those, that at least we've enabled everybody else to go off and do the stuff that they do. It doesn't make it necessarily the most productive, and then we start working our way up the stack. But a lot of times it turns out there's other new enabling things we need to do, or something else that we enabled, we just didn't do it fast enough. And we spend a lot of cycles then going back and trying to re-enable that and make sure it's performance. So what you do see is that we do focus on really, if we don't give you performance, then it's really hard for you to get it. So you do see that's where we start. And then we like to go higher up. And if we can go higher up in a performant way, and we have time to do that, then you'll see us spend more cycles on the developer productivity aspect of it. But in general, just to give you an idea, that's kind of how we approach it.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, hello.
I think you were...
Yeah, I'm first. Okay, I'm Boris from UC Web. We build UC Browser. We haven't decided to switch to XAML at this moment, but I've got two questions. First is, what happened to the clipboard API? So actually, we are expecting from Windows Phone A to Windows Phone 8.1, we're actually expecting we can get both set clipboard and get a clipboard content API. But at the dev preview, we saw it's gone.
Yeah, I'm going to cover that in my next talk on at 5:30. 90% of the APIs have converged between phone and Windows. A few of them, they just couldn't reconcile in time between different teams. I don't work directly with that API, but it is one of a couple that I'm calling out, and it can stop you right now from moving your app over to a full XAML app. And we know that we're going to work hard to converge everything in the future, or not everything, but everything we can. And unfortunately, there's 2 or 3 things like that. Lock screen wallpaper provider, that's another one that's probably even more painful than that. So if you're an app like a sporting app, a weather app, and you provide a live lock screen image, that's another candidate for not moving over to a XAML app. But with Silverlight 8.1, we've added a ton of new features to keep you going with Silverlight. There's a large number of the WinRT API surface that's brought over there as well.
But what about the get content? Because it's missing for a long time.
Oh, again, I don't own that space, but I think it's just been a big security issue in that you don't want some app to be able to get the last thing. Maybe you pasted a password into your clipboard. I think it's some logic along those lines, but unfortunately, it's a separate team that owns that particular API, so I don't know exactly their decisions on that one, but I can understand it's a little painful, and I hope they find a way to allow it in some secure, maybe limited way.
Okay, I understand. So the second question is, what's the future or roadmap on, what's the difference between Silverlight and RT? Will it, because next version or something for a year, half a year, will one of them stop developing, or will they?
So again, come to my talk if you have time at 5:30. I've already given you some spoilers, but essentially what you'll see, and the message I'm going to be giving you is, the XAML universal apps are sort of our future one XAML platform. That's where innovation is going to happen first. New devices, as you saw, if you build an app there, you saw Kevin. It was demoed at the keynote that Xbox will come at some point in the future. You'll see new devices there first. So that's the broader future. However, a big message we want to give is Silverlight apps for phone are not dead. We've done a lot of work to keep you guys going. Again, I know there's only, like I said, 90% of the APIs have converged. There's still a little bit of leeway. We want to make sure we're not throwing you off a cliff and saying you have to go. You don't have to port your app over. You can keep it as Silverlight 8.1. We don't have our plans fully developed yet for the next release, so we don't know exactly what we're going to be adding in then. But over the next few months, and with feedback from you guys, that'll help us.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
I wanted to know, there's a lot of gap between what WPF offers as far as XAML goes and Windows Store apps and Silverlight, I guess. But I want to know if you guys have a plan to publish a roadmap where the gap's going to be filled in, how long that's going to take, what you guys expect to put in future releases. We constantly, as an example, we had to create our own, we'd have Windows Store app, we had to create our own date time control, and then 8.1 came out and there was a date time control, and it's wasted effort on our part when we can't see what's coming, when we could choose to wait instead of develop and possibly waste our time.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know exactly what we plan to roll out with a roadmap. I mean, we're just starting in the middle of our planning right now. I hope we're planning on being more open with stuff, so I suspect we will. I'm a program manager on the XAML convergence team, so we're really looking at everything that didn't converge. We want to just keep going there, bring everything that above that 90%, get it much higher. Sean's on the controls team. He's making sure that all the properties and controls are converged over time. I don't know if we can say more, Joe, on an actual plan to...
In general, I think you'll find that we'll be as more transparent, but it'll be still limited by we make plans, we start to execute on those plans, and at some point in time we hit critical mass with our plans, and usually you find then it's like a beta or alpha, and sometimes that's when it's disclosed to you, and you may find that traditionally that's probably what we've done. You still feel it's a little too late, but sometimes we don't like to announce before that because we're just not sure. We're iterating all the way up until, and still figuring things out all the way up until we get to the point where we're first ready to disclose at an alpha or beta period. I think what you'll find now is in the past, maybe we've done betas or RCs, and that's when you find out. Now you find out at more of a traditional alpha period, but we'll iterate. We'll still be figuring out what's actually going to make it into the platform all the way up until we're ready to do kind of an alpha external release.
And quick question, do you guys plan on coming out with a data grid control for Windows Store apps? I mean, I know traditionally that's not the focus for how those store apps are, but I do a line of business app, and that's a big key component in one of our apps.
So it's interesting. I don't know if Tim or...
I was just going to ask, so let me ask you a question on that front. Do you feel that commercial offerings are insufficient? And if so, why?
I feel like you can't convey a lot of data that a data grid has in tile formats in a lot of situations, especially with what I do. There's a lot of estimating. I do car damage estimating.
Okay.
And so when you write an estimate, you need to see line by line what's going on. You can't convey it in any other way.
No, but I mean, as far as like, why not just use Telerik's data grid controller, Infogistics, or DevExpress?
We tried a couple of them. They're not, it's almost too much functionality, and it just didn't suit our needs. We did try 2 other third-party controls, and they were not what we needed. So we ended up rolling our own, but it's that same scenario. If you guys come out with one 6 months down the road, would it have been worthwhile for us to wait? There's more support. Also, the other problem with third-party tends to be that, oh, there's a bug in it. Now our customers are experiencing this problem. We have to go and get them to fix it. It just gets, it gets cumbersome.
Yeah. So thank you for that information. So kind of to reiterate what Joe was mentioning is one of the things that we're looking at is like how do we or how easily are we enabling those scenarios? And I think what you see is like, especially in the XAML ecosystem, we have a really, really healthy third-party ecosystem, and most of the time, like our third-party control vendors deliver, a lot more value in feature sets and configurability than a lot of our controls. If we spent an engineering cycle on creating a data grid, would it be sufficient for people's needs, or would they end up just going to Telerik, which has like all grouping and sorting, et cetera, and stuff like so? Those are the challenges that we're looking at now, and how we prioritize higher level controls versus that. But we are looking at like, can you even create a data grid, and what are the things that that are enabled there? Like do we expose enough interaction for virtualization? Do we do the right things for touch? And in things like, as we move to the modern world too, like what is a data grid on a 8 to 10 inch device where you don't have a keyboard? What is that interaction model? So for that question specifically, it's kind of a bit of a hot topic for us internally as well, as like how we prioritize these things and how we actually define classic, old school, or whatever term you want to put it, design patterns into a mobile first kind of world. So.
Yeah, just to echo on what Tim said, we've actually, as Tim's alluding to, we've talked a lot internally about data grid and charting. I'll say are 2 things that we think a lot about in terms of what that means in the modern world. When we think of traditional desktop apps, and not only do you have them in WPF data grids, but you also have third parties that are rich and they're nice. And so we think there's this, for people building desktop apps, there's this solution out there for it. And then we think about modern apps, and we think really one of the value props is touch. And as we start to think about not just the investment, but we start to visualize what does a data grid look like in that world? Do we think you could just go ahead and crank out a traditional data grid, but we're like, is that what you want on your, pull out my phone, is that what you want on your phone, and is that what you want on your tablet, or do you want it reimagined, if you will, in some different way? And so we go through those, like, what does this thing, should it look like? And a data grid is a button. It's pretty easy to visualize on the different form factors. It doesn't change that much, but data grid, we struggle with a little bit more. We just want to make sure that we're not going to create something that is this really dense thing that turns out is not going to work in this kind of modern world. So we have been thinking about it. It's just, for us anyway, it hasn't turned out to be a super easy thing to go, oh, here's clearly what a data grid means in the WinRT world.
Thank you.
I think that just a short comment. I think that is exactly the interesting thing. It's maybe not exactly about a data grid, but an alternative way of displaying large amounts of data.
Exactly.
It's really LOB data that, and Excel kind of has the same challenge, right? How do you bring from a spreadsheet, rather, like you said, rather complex data into a tablet form factor? Many companies struggle with that, and maybe they pick a third-party data grid, but it's not really a cool tablet experience.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what we've been thinking about, and what Tim's kind of implying is how we've thought about it was maybe we just do what we think is that if you're going to display a lot of data and render a lot of data, then at least let's make sure that our framework, if you will, is set up to really be able to crank through that and then allow third parties and us to iterate on top of that as we figure out what does a data grid, what really should the data grid be in this world. And that, anyway, well, it's an ongoing conversation with us internally. We'd love your feedback and thoughts, but just to let you know, that's kind of where we are with data grid moving forward.
And just to round out the recording, since that won't be on there, you were talking about apps like Excel or spreadsheets or other things, and having to struggle with how that works on those form factors. So, cool. Thank you. So, Andreas, I think you're next. Okay.
Hi, Adam Krantz with Rhapsody. My question is kind of related to performance, where there's a lot of things where you want to execute commands and things off of the UI thread, but dependency properties require being on the UI thread, and like property change notifications and collection change notifications kind of require being on the UI thread. Are there any changes perceived where we could have objects be changed on any thread and have the system sort of manage the updates dealing with the apartment threading or whatever the controls actually have to deal with?
I will say in the WinRT space, this is actually one thing that we're investigating now is kind of the cost and weight and interaction model around dependency object, dependency property, change notification, and kind of an async or off UI thread data model. Like these are all things that are on our current what should we go look at list. We haven't formed any solid opinions or plans on how we change those things without breaking compat, or is compat a concern with how people expect to use certain things. But yes, we are looking at how we have heard that request. It's not a small feat the way that our architecture is right now, but we're looking at those things as part of our future roadmap.
And I guess the other question is, for large collections, doing like data virtualization and better ways to make it so that if you're binding to a collection source, to have like patterns that make it easy to handle doing data virtualization. Is that something that
yes,
there's patterns to do?
Yes, there's definitely a lot of investigation right now on how can we improve data virtualization, UI virtualization, make sure that it can be easier for developers and have sort of a more common pattern.
Yeah.
So it's not something you have to reinvent every time you go to a new application or new control, a new solution. That's an area we're heavily investing in.
Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andreas Muka from Bits of Yours, and actually my comment and question ties very much into the previous one. So I'm heavily interested in UI and data virtualization, and my first thing is a comment, and okay, I might be wrong, but I have the impression that currently what is happening on the control side is mostly geared towards actually a use case that is coming from the web, so where the data is actually loaded from the cloud, and then actually the controls make it very easy to handle that in a virtualized manner, which is great. And actually I wanted to underline that I'm very happy about the controls that you're providing, so definitely a very, very good job. I was just saying, okay, since I'm more coming from the local angle, and I wanted to highlight, okay, there's people like me as well who want to have the local data being virtualized, because there's a lot of data local, and having the means to actually show it and get it processed on the UI side as quickly as possible. The question is, okay, maybe can you add some more comments in terms of what concrete plans you have with regard to especially UI virtualization? And maybe one concrete question from my side would be any further means of actually, for example, controlling the caching, additional means in terms of controlling the caching that is used for UI virtualization.
Woo! That's
all about UI virtualization.
So now I'll take the thank you first. We're great controls. Thank you very much. As far as concrete plans for what we can do for virtualization, I would love to share it with you. But we have a team of PMs and devs back in Redmond right now investigating just this. What's the best way we can improve virtualization? How can we make UI virtualization easier, data virtualization easier, and more accessible to developers, so you don't have to do a lot of esoteric code to try to make it happen. So I would love to share plans and show you what we're doing, but I don't know what we're doing quite yet. So it's hard to give a specific one. As far as caching, we should sync up afterwards and try to figure out like what your exact scenario is. Try to understand, are you pulling, say, 10,000 items off of local storage and then just trying to work from there? Or are you pulling out in pages? understanding that scenario, then we can give you some better tips on how to actually handle that.
Yeah, I mean, that would have been my question, because I think everybody has a somewhat different kind of a use case. And having just additional means of somehow filling the cache in the manner that actually fits that specific use case, I think that might be helpful, because, not every use case is the same.
Yeah, each one is highly specific. Depends on what your UI container actually is. Is it complicated? Is it small? What type of control you're virtualizing into? A list view or a hub or a pivot? So all those factors come into play. So that'll sync up.
And I'd also throw a plug out for Chapalo's. I think you did the session last year on the grid view, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that
Yeah.
was.
So is everybody familiar with the grid view performance enhancements that were made last year with 8.1? For being able to do the phased generation of templates, or I don't know what the best way you wanted to say that is.
So in 8.1, we did two things around showing placeholder elements for items that haven't virtualized or been realized completely when you're scrolling, and then incremental updating so that you could say render the background and then the title of all the elements that are being realized from virtualization as you're scrolling very quickly through a list.
Right. So that's something it's not a property on the control, so a lot of people don't see it right away. It's a different approach for populating that stuff. So definitely good to take a look at that session from last year to understand some of the performance improvements for that as well.
Yeah, and that's definitely around the UI virtualization part of it as opposed to the data side.
Okay.
For the universal apps, have you fixed the from navigation event? Or is it still like Windows 8?
So have we fixed what? I'm sorry, did you guys catch up?
The from navigation event?
The page navigation.
Or are you talking about like custom types that aren't serializable?
No, I'm talking about on Windows Phone, you have the navigation to event and a navigation from event. And then when you go back to the start screen, the from event fires. But on Windows 8, and I think on universal apps also, when you go back to the start screen, nothing fires.
Sounds like a bug.
Oh, let's see. There's a talk, I think, on the navigation model. So I don't know the exact details there. There is one difference which I cover in my Silverlight talk as well. In Silverlight 8.0, and this might be related, you're probably familiar with Fast App Resume.
Yes.
So by default in Silverlight 8.0, all apps use the retry, which means you launch your app, navigate in it, you hit the start button, then you launch your app again, and then the app is relaunched. It's restarted. You can set it to Fast App Resume, which means resume instead, so it comes up faster. On XAML apps, Fast App Resume is the default. In fact, that's the only mode. And Silverlight 8.1, I'm going to talk about that as well, only has Fast App Resume as well. So that might be why that event is not fired, because the app is suspended differently for a XAML app. But I would check out that talk. I think they probably go into details on it's happening right now. Run.
My comment on that is when you have Fast App Resume enabled, there's no way in the page to detect that you're no longer visible, that you're no longer front. So both for Windows and for Windows Phone, if you're using some resource like the web camera, and when you're minimizing, you want to leave that. But you can't detect it. You can detect it in the app CS file, and then you have to like find your current page and inject it somehow so you can update it. So that was the only event that worked on Windows Phone.
Yeah, I don't know enough details myself on the XAML side for the navigation stack. Does anyone else up here?
I just know I've been bit by it before.
Yeah.
So it might be worth hooking him up with the other speaker who's doing.
Yeah, Robert Carmen is the one. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tyler McDowell with Curse, and first I want to say I love XAML. I use it all the time. I'm a WPF developer, and my first question is, I could be wrong on this, are you guys going to add support to XAML for native SVG support, so we don't have to do like open up expression design and convert it to like a resource dictionary or a brush? Unless you can do it right now, I wasn't sure.
So native SVG.
Yeah.
Because my designers don't like to like open it up in another tool. They like to save it from Illustrator and just send it to me.
Yeah, I would say that's something that's not really high on our list. There's, I see Navit here from the tools team. They have some importers that can do that, and actually there's a community of folks that have created some exporters from Illustrator and Photoshop tools and things. But direct, like understanding SVG direct rendering is not something that's currently on our list.
Okay. One more question. So the app that we make is used by gamers on computers. It's a WPF app. One of the things we noticed with WPF, when there's a game running, because WPF uses DirectX, performance in the app goes way down if there's a game running. And I was wondering if there's a way, if you guys have any plans to solve that in future WPF, or maybe that's the wrong time to ask.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
Let's chat afterwards to understand the scenario more.
Okay.
Cool.
So I'm just kind of wondering, I know you don't have like a concrete roadmap, but for WPF, what's your viewpoint on it as far as, is it something that you're going to kind of keep running and it's just more legacy stuff, or are you going to be putting serious investments on it to kind of keep moving the desktop forward, alongside the WinRT platform for Windows 8 and beyond? Because, in my company, and I'm sure many others, in the next 5 years, we're still going to be, any new app is going to be started in WPF. So it feels like right now that you're just kind of maintaining it, but I just wasn't sure if that's something that you're going to be actually investing in going forward.
Joe?
Well, the way we've been looking at it is, from a WPF perspective, is it's something we're still investing in, and we'll still continue to invest in. And what we've been, asking folks, and love your feedback, is sort of what do you need? What are your pain points in WPF? There's a lot of investment that people see in the WinRT XAML side, but that's because it started from nothing and it required investment, a lot of investment just to get where it is. And WPF is fairly mature and works well for desktop apps, and so it's, even to us, we can never find that sweet spot of set of things that feel like are the right investments to make with WPF moving forward. We do expect moving forward, the future, however you want to look at it, it's close or way out there. The future is we'd like to have one modern UI stack, if you will, that works great for desktop apps and for touch apps, and that's going to be our WinRT XAML stack. But today, for desktop apps, we really have one solution, and that's for WPF. And we want to keep investing in WPF for those, if you will, traditional desktop scenarios. And for us, we're trying to gather feedback. What is it that people want to see today in WPF? What are the biggest pain points? And if there's some things, and maybe pain points is not quite the right way, but what is it that's missing that you feel that you need? And we'd like to get that feedback so we can just make sure we're being smart about our investments moving forward.
I'd say a lot of the data apps, I agree, it definitely works well, but if you're going to have a tablet that's x86, you might want to do a lot of desktop stuff. You still want, something that's touch friendly. So getting some of the Windows 8 controls running on WPF so that you can actually have, a full desktop app, all the capabilities it has running in the background, hitting all the admin stuff, but you can still actually use it in touch. You don't have to be in Metro for touch. You can still, because you can design a WPF app in the desktop that's touch friendly, but I think getting more support for that in the native controls would make it easier for people to gradually add touch and tablets into the workforce without having to drop the desktop and go right into Metro.
Were you in our desktop talk earlier?
I missed that, actually.
Okay, that's because, so we talked about this a little bit before because we got this question. And in general, the way that we like to think about it moving forward is we have Win32 today, which includes WPF. It includes all our Win32 technologies. And desktop apps can use all of Win32. And then we have sort of WinRT, and right now there's a very small part of WinRT that desktop apps can use. And we like to think moving forward that Win32 should just be a superset, should include all of WinRT, all the WinRT APIs, as well as all the Win32 APIs. And that would include being able to do things like leverage the new UI stack, if you will, doing contracts, doing live tiles. But feel your desktop app should be able to do all the things that a modern app should do. And so when we think about it moving forward, for your scenarios, we think, well, it would be nice if you could just put if you will, a modern touch view. Because WPF, 12 years old, and it just wasn't designed from the ground up to be really touch-friendly, if you will, immersive, buttery-rich. It was designed to be a productivity-based, high productivity-based UI framework. In a world before, we had these small devices that you need things to run super buttery rich and fast on. So the way we think about it now is that, hey, how can we we can't really rewrite all of WPF and create this new touch-friendly stack because that's what we did, and that's what the new stuff is. So instead, can we just let you use that in your existing app? And that's how we think moving forward. That feels like a more logical answer to your solution, is if we could just find a better way to blend these two worlds and create one big world for the desktop developers, and then for the people who are doing store-deployed apps and going to smaller devices, then we restrict them to basically the strict WinRT set, if you will. But that's how we think about solving your problem moving forward.
Yeah, you have a question.
Can you use the mic, please? Thanks.
Sorry, just to add something was, it'd be really nice to make a universal app that still ran on Windows 7, so that, because the reality is we're not going to be just targeting people running Windows 8. And if you had like a Metro app running in a window on the desktop or whatever that feels like, if that same thing could be ported to Windows 7, that would make it a lot easier because there would not be as much of a need for WPF.
Yeah, so we understand that's I can give you the long answer, I can give you the short answer, but let me try this sort of approach. Fully understand the Windows 7 issue. In general, I think of Windows 7 as a great productivity desktop thing, but not necessarily a touch machine. So if you will, if you could build an app that was a traditional desktop app, and that traditional desktop app had touch-friendly views that were just present on Windows 8 and above, if you think about it. So you could, there are ways, as we think about it, there could be ways where you could still get a Windows 7 app. Just like today, you can leverage in your Windows 7 desktop app, you can, if you will, use Win32 APIs that are only available on Windows 8 and above. And we think you'd still maybe be able to build this one app that ran on Windows 7 that had views, if you will, that are only present or light up on Windows 8, versus bringing all the technology down to Windows 7. We think of, can you just light up on Windows 8 where you have the new hardware, you have all the new subsystems, you have all the things that really are going to give you that great touch experience. But that, again, that's sort of how we approach it, because it's so hard. If we were to, the new touch stack, but all of WinRT, I'll say, is just built on new subsystems that only exist in Windows 8. And if we were to bring all that down to Windows 7, you'd have Windows 7 become Windows 8, or whatever the future version is. So we tend to think of it as, can we just enable light up that allows you to get what you need without us having to necessarily bring all that, if you will, down level.
Sorry, one more question, because I did miss the desktop one. Is there any chance of allowing WPF or just desktop apps in general to integrate more, like you said, with WinRT, mainly in terms of something like, say, the share contract? So I think a good example, if I have something I want to share from an app, if I'm on a desktop computer and I have Outlook, I may want to email from Outlook instead of the Metro Mail app. And I think allowing desktop apps to integrate with that API would make the share charm for a desktop user be less of a nuisance and something that they could actually enjoy, take advantage of and enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Office and Microsoft Apps, they say the exact same thing you do, if you will, to the Windows team. And so we realize that's the world we want to get to. In the case of some of these things, there's a concept of app identity that we get with store apps that we don't get with desktop apps. We just have to find some ways to solve those problems. But we are looking exactly at that. We go, it should be a Win32, if you will, that family should be a superset, and that means you should be able to do all those things. And if that means in some cases you got to yourself an identity or something else to get those, then we should enable you to do that so you could take advantage of exactly those sorts of things.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, so I'm Jerome from Jerome Labon from Inventive. I do have a problem. It's this rhetorical question. Let's have a new client coming in. I don't know any Windows, and I don't know HTML either. And I want to develop on Windows. So what do I choose? Do I choose XAML or do I choose HTML and WinJS? I'm asking that. I do have that question, and personally, I prefer XAML because for obvious reasons of legacy code and knowing all this. But HTML and JavaScript, on the other hand, they do have HTML that gives a long advanced in terms of feature set, let's say text rendering, that kind of thing, that clearly lack, even if they lacked in WPF and still lack in WinRT apps. So how do I choose?
So did you ask the XAML team if they would prefer XAML?
I mean, I asked the XAML team what would be the arguments for you to choose XAML instead of WinJS?
So I think to give you sort of a high-level answer, in one, it depends on the app experience you're building. Let's just assume it's a traditional LOB, whatever type app. Then if it's traditional where experience isn't the most important thing, or let's say you want to do something and reach is the absolute most important thing. If reach is the most important thing, then I'd say, and experience is not something high on your chart, then probably you're thinking more HTML side of it. If you're somewhere in the middle where you go, it really doesn't matter, I just want to pick a technology, I'm sure either would work, then I look at who do you have building the app? Is it easier for you to get web devs? Is it easier for you to get XAML devs? What code are you leveraging? Is it HTML code? Then use HTML. A lot of apps these days are hybrids, and you can build part of it out in HTML and part of it out in DX for the graphic stuff and part of it out in XAML for the UI if you have folks like that. But I never think of it these days as for the most part, for a binary decision. Unless I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to build a site. And for a site, I go, OK, then I'm pretty much my only choice is HTML. But for an app, you have to look at a bunch of different factors, including where it's going, the experience you want, the people you've got, is the content coming from somewhere else? And based on all those, it helps you figure out what's the right solution to use for your app. And I have to say that the couple of guys from WinJS are here sitting in front, so I couldn't badmouth WinJS like I know.
Actually, that was my intent.
Yeah.
Bring it on, baby.
And I'm just joking.
Equal.
Yes.
That is all.
So if for some reason I didn't answer it quite right, then Chris and Josh here in the front row, they'll be more than happy to answer your questions after. These actually are the WinJS guys right here in the front row.
Thank you.
I think you'll find that we can say pretty much anything here in front of the room, but if you take a look at the apps that we've developed internally, you'll see pretty equal representation across XAML and across WinJS and stuff as well. So
yeah, but
that probably speaks even.
If you look at the apps that have been developed by third parties, that's not what it is. It's mostly, I think, 80% XAML and the rest is WinJS, and it's the other way around. Or last time I checked, this was the other way around for internal apps. So it's kind of a discrepancy in terms.
All depends on their experience. So.
Yeah, a lot of Microsoft people are .NET XAML folks. You get a lot of that. A lot of people are thinking, I want a native app, and that's the way to build a native app because of native experience on other platforms. Other people are thinking, you know what, I got to get it to all, a consumer app, I want to get to all endpoints, and something like HTML and using a solution like Cordova is the easiest and best way to get it to all possible endpoints. So it is, there are a lot of factors, and I hate to say there's any one solution because they're just not. And even you'll see the XAML apps all have HTML hosted in them for help docs or for other content they get from somewhere. So you see a lot of hybrid apps these days as well. And so I think it's just a matter of figuring out what's the best way to use the resources you have, the content you have, the developers you have to get the experience you need at the end of the day. And it won't be a binary answer.
I'll stick to XAML.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have great controls.
Josh and Chris, just leave that guy alone. He's okay.
We love XAML.
Yeah, we know. Chris also, he started out in WPF, so he's got a long history in the XAML. Actually, yeah, that's right. And Josh was a CLR person, so before they turned to the dark side.
Oh, sing.
I'm just joking. Chris and I worked together on the last version of XAML and WinJS. So he was dev side, I was the PM side.
Okay, next.
One of the main needs I have in both the WPF and in the modern XAML, WinRT XAML, is immediate mode rendering without having to descend all the way to the level of writing direct 2D and DirectX code. I guess what I'm really looking for is something about on the level of the HTML5 canvas that's very well integrated into the XAML experience. In WPF, we had on render. We could override that and sort of get there, but it still retained, so it still had a lot of performance limitations. So I guess, is there any plans to do something like an HTML5 canvas to give us a little bit more immediate mode rendering capability?
In WPF?
Well, I'd love to have it in WPF, but I'm not going to get it, I don't think. But at least in WinRT, it'd be nice to be able to do that.
So is this from your C# developer standpoint?
Yeah, I'm basically, the sort of applications we have is real-time trending of data with thousands of data points being updated per second. This is not possible to do without some sort of immediate mode rendering. And we don't want to write it in direct 2D because then we have a big maintenance challenge to basically our developers are not that skilled in the DirectX world. We want to keep it at the level that we can bring in new people who don't know anything about graphics programming and be able to maintain the code, right?
So I will say that yes, we're looking at that on a couple levels of, you know, how can we deliver, how do we deliver that in a public API that is the right layering for, you know, from a productivity standpoint, from a, you know, .NET developer who probably doesn't see DX as an approachable, you know, target, things like that. So we are looking at different approaches in the WinRT side of things of how we can expose more primitive drawing rendering APIs.
Right. It'd be great if it was actually HTML5 canvas compatible, for example, because then we can reuse a great deal of code from the JavaScript world and that sort of thing.
Is there a reason you just don't host HTML controller?
Well, actually, I do. That's my workaround to the problem right now. But
and it's still not performant, is it?
Well, it's performant. It just adds complexity. Where if it was something, it's not that you can't really host a web browser control just to draw the edges of your control, right? If it's something where it's like the on render override, then I could use immediate mode rendering to draw like details and things like that. Would be really nice.
Okay.
Yeah. Good
I think we're all just nodding in agreement thinking that's interesting. So.
Actively looking at it.
Great.
I wanted to, I work in both WPF and on the Windows Store stuff. And sorry. And so I work both WPF and Windows Store, and I find myself going back to WPF and missing triggers in Windows Store stuff. Is there any plan to move those over, or are we just stuck with the storyboard stuff right now?
So I'll echo what we said earlier about making sure that we have the scenarios enabled, and then, you know, we are looking at what are features that existed in WPF, and, you know, how can we enable those same things, maybe not in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, triggers and other, the more XAML you have in the tree, the more cost is to your application, right? And so we first want to look at that and say, you know, how do we implement things like triggers or even VSM at the simple level of, like, you know, removing the cost of those type of things in the tree before we add more things to the tree.
Okay.
Or at least to the hierarchy of
it
things.
just feels like it's so much more complex to use the Visual State Manager versus triggers. You know, if you look at just the difference in XAML between the same two controls, WPF is much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take your scenario and you sort of pop up a level, is it that you're asking for triggers or just a simpler way to do what VSM does today?
Either.
Okay.
Simpler would be wonderful, yeah.
That's a good data point for us. Because a lot of people say we want triggers, but is it really you want triggers or you want just to make it easier to do property changes and based on state change?
When you do the Visual State Manager stuff, you have to code in two spots. You have to code, you know, to change the state in your control, and then you have to code what happens to the state. Whereas if you have properties that are already available, which you're monitoring to change the states, you know, it's just much easier. There's less work involved.
Yeah, that's something we're definitely looking at right now is how can we make that whole syntax and the whole process just easier, less cumbersome, and more productive.
Okay, thank you.
So 2 questions. First, binding syntax, is there any chance of getting more expressive, like expressions or things like that right in the binding syntax rather than going through parameters that, again, you have to code in some other place?
One of the approaches that we're looking at in binding is looking at how, you know, people like binding. It's a very productive environment. You know, binding as it exists today is, we refer to it internally as like kind of like a pull model, right? So the runtime is actually doing a lot of work for your app. Binding is actually one of the areas of the runtime that can be more costly to your app experience. So we're looking at ways of how we can still maintain the productivity in the developer experience of using binding syntax or understanding what that means, and how that might, you know, as an example, might generate code that is high performance of what the binding expression would be. If in our thinking around this area, it would allow you to do more things in that design time experience around binding, giving you kind of some extensibility points to basically kind of create your own functions within binding and things like that. So we're trying to think outside of the box there as almost a design time code gen type feature that may not be a runtime feature.
Sure, that would be a good solution. Just to not have to go out and create a converter just to add one to the, you know,
Exactly.
the parameter that I'm getting in, that sort of thing. My other question is about the sort of the longer term future. With WPF, I think that we sort of got stranded with DirectX 9, and not to say that it couldn't have been brought forward, but is there something in XAML that's going to make it difficult for Microsoft to maintain the XAML platform on top of a modern current version of DirectX as time goes on?
So I'm going to assume you did not come to the previous session on desktop. Is
No,
that
I was
correct?
not in that.
Okay, so we touched on that subject a little bit. And yes, moving WPF to DirectX 11 is something that we're considering. One of the most important things that we want to understand from you guys, our customers, is what do you want when that comes forward? Is it just let's make sure that WPF is set for the future and DX 11 will be supported much longer than DX 9? Or is it, do you want DX 11 features in D3D image, or do you actually want DX 11 content in your scene but not composed by the UI thread?
Well,
And
I'm thinking more along the lines of, you know, like, so for example, Internet Explorer is based on the latest, you know, the latest version of DirectX, and so there are things that seem like they're more performant. Maybe DirectX 12, it sounds like there's going to be, you know, things that cut out certain portions of the pipeline in order to, you know, to streamline the experience. You know, it's just as DirectX evolves, and undoubtedly it will, is that going to be something where the design of XAML inherently makes it really, really costly for you to continue to maintain that going forward? Because otherwise I'm a little bit afraid that we're going to end up in the same situation 5 years down the road.
If I had a crystal ball, I would assume that we will definitely move WPF to DirectX 11 at some point in the future, because we're going to need to
I'm not really
support.
asking about WPF. I'm asking about how do we prevent the same thing from happening to the XAML stack that we have right now. You know, it's easier to keep it on, you know, right out of the gate, it's DirectX 11 or whatever. But how do we keep it from then, you know, now we're at DirectX 13, 14 or whatever, and there's this new stuff. How do we prevent it from saying, okay, well, that would be really a lot of work. I mean, maybe it's just the design of XAML doesn't match very well, and that is what causes the problem. But that's really what I'm asking about, is how do we, or is there a plan to mitigate that, or to make sure that that doesn't become a problem down the road?
I think the best thing for us would be to make sure that we're talking to the DX team to know what they're planning on. And I know this version, we're talking to them about how can we improve animations, how can we improve our composition system. So as long as we have a good conversation internally, I think we can mitigate that to a fair degree.
Okay, thank you.
Other than that, it's code that needs to be changed, right? I mean, it's not that there is some large technical difficulty that require you to rewrite everything for a version of DirectX. It's just, it depends on where DirectX goes, and right? Yes.
I think it's a fair question. What I heard from the question was, you know, we have DX9 support. You know, how if we change to DX11 support, you know, are we only changing to DX11 support, or are we, you know, changing to a design that allows us to adapt to future capabilities? And I think it's a very fair question that we need to think about as we make those changes.
Chris, you want a piece of the answer? I get a sense, yeah.
Sorry, your question was about XAML, the new WinRT version, right?
No.
Yes, so it's a going forward question.
Yes.
The architecture of XAML is significantly different than WPF, and the fact that WPF was layered on top of basically directly on top of DX, whereas XAML, when we built it, we've layered it on top of the decomp services, the core D2D APIs that are in the platform, and so it's built on more of the stack that we're evolving all at the same time with DX. So fundamentally, as we move DX forward, all of those systems move on top of it at the same time. So it's a lot harder to get out of skew with the underlying platform from the graphics capability. So we're in a much better position from a standpoint of the core architecture of XAML with the new bits. Is that fair?
Yeah, sorry. I think we all heard your
Thank you,
question
sir.
as a WPF one, so sorry.
Do I want to let you have?
Yeah, I don't know. So back
Next
to
question.
Back to WPF. Back to WPF. You've established that you're working on or taking input on the next version of WPF or future enhancements to WPF, even to the point of actually posting job postings for this. So everybody's on board, but officially you haven't come out and said we are actually doing or looking into the next version of WPF. So unless it was in the last session and I missed it, But so my it's not so much a question as an ask. Can you have an official blog post that actually says that this is what you're doing, and invite the input that you're looking for from the broad public? And in fact, maybe even go so far as to use user voice to post the kind of things you're talking about with the different views and the lighting up view concepts, short of obviously backporting the XAML stack onto Windows 7. Can you go official and get that input? Because I think there have been some tweets that people have made about this, and they get retweeted like crazy. So the interest is definitely there, but there's been nothing official. So can you make it official?
Well, I thought this morning it was maybe it was too nuanced, but in terms of we don't actually have official plans on any of what we're doing for the next wave, I'll say, of Windows. So it's tough to say we're doing something specific. What we can do is we can come out and say, hey, here's what we're thinking, or here's our user voice is kind of a good idea. Is there something we can do there? We can update it, because the old user voice on WPF, we've gone back and mined it, and they're like, make it compatible with Silverlight, the plugin version, to give you an idea of how dated it is. But it's a good idea that we can do something like that, where we can go out and say, hey, here's kind of what we're thinking, or here's the short list. Are you guys in, or your short list? What do you want today? Clear out user voice and say, because we're listening, we want to know. And then as soon as we have some more committed plans, we can start to share those. But as it is right now, we're just gathering. We're in the data gathering phase. And as such, we've talked about a bunch of things that are in our short list of things we're thinking about, but we don't have any committed plans that we could talk to yet. Across, again, not just WPF, across all of OSG, except for we are bringing back the start menu, I see.
But even the fact that you're actually in that phase is something people are desperately keen to hear about.
Yeah, and happy to figure out some chat. I know actually there's somebody in the room who's posted that we're actively, maybe that's the chatter that you're talking about. But we'll see what we can do in terms of just saying, hey, make sure it comes from Microsoft. Hey, we're soliciting input. We want to hear what you want to say about the next version of WPF. But we are listening. We have a team. Yeah. We want to know what to do.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we have time for a short question.
I guess I had one question with virtualizing wrap panel. It'd be nice to see something supported. I was surprised that it doesn't actually exist. The second was Windows Phone has like background image loading, and I was wondering if there were going to be improvements for WPF or the others like store apps in terms of the performance for loading large numbers of images. And the third was with WPF, it'd be great to have
3 questions.
I know,
Three
quick.
short questions.
Just real quick. So it'd be nice to see media player and media element integration between the desktop and running Windows 8 so that the volume panel would show what's playing from a WPF music app.
Like on the taskbar?
Like the volume panel and the integration that happens from Windows Store app.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Can you squeeze in this one quickly?
Okay, yeah. I was wondering about the discrepancies between WPF and WinRT XAML, things that we should have been in WPF in a while, like the projection transformations, for example. Things that are staying in WPF, like motion paths, that are not in WinRT XAML. The 3D, of course, hierarchical data templates. I can understand why hierarchical data templates cannot make it to the flat design of, but they are not there. Is there a roadmap to pick or unify a little bit the UI and the features?
Joe, can you share your general philosophy on the gaps and what you got, how you analyze those?
In general, everything we look at, we have to sort of prioritize. We try not to just fill gaps between WPF or WinRT for the sake of filling them. We try to look at them and go, we think the use cases today for WPF, for desktop apps and for store apps are slightly different touch-based apps. And so what we've been trying to do is, yes, they're different, and we understand that they are different today. And so as there are gaps between them, we try to look at them and we say, what are the most important? What are the ones that really matter? And are those the ones that we should spend time filling now, or are there other things we should spend our cycles on? So we tend not to look at it necessarily as how do we bring them close together? We try to look at what are the things that we want to, what's causing the most pain, if you will, or what do most people need to do today? And let's focus our efforts and energies on that. And for WPF, the set of things are, continue to make it a great UI platform for desktop apps. And for the touch store apps, it tends to be more consumer-oriented type experiences we do there. And a lot of times they cross paths, but not always. And that's what leads to those gaps. And when they do, sometimes we realize the gaps are bigger than we thought, and then we try to say, how can we fill those gaps? But that's generally how we sort of approach those sorts of things. And then we look for people to give us feedback, and based on the feedback, if we find out there's certain areas where we're getting a lot of feedback, hey, that gap, it just makes it impossible for me to, whether it's leverage assets or just seems like a step backwards, then we say, okay, maybe we should spend some cycles. That's maybe more important than doing some new features or performance work. Let's spend our cycles filling those gaps. So we look at your feedback really to help us guide what the right investments to make in terms of bringing them closer together.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
Sure.
Okay, and so just a final plug for your Silverlight 8.1.
Yep.
Our Windows Phone Silverlight 8.1 session is in room 2018
Yep.
here in the next half hour. So thank you, everybody, for attending this, and thanks for all the great questions.
Thank you much, everybody.
And thanks also to the